Gettysburg Seminary presents the Seminary Explores podcast. Conversations on faith, art, people, politics, theology, life, and more, with voices from around the corner and around the globe. Welcome to the Seminary Explores. I'm Katy Giebenhain with Seminary Ridge Review. My guest is Tony Curtis, Emeritus Professor of Poetry at the University of South Wales. He is the author or editor of more than 30 books, which include 8 poetry collections, anthologies, critical works, and collaborations with visual artists. Tony, welcome to the Seminary Explores.
Thank you.
One of your subjects and influences for many, many years is war, and this is your first visit to Gettysburg, right?
It is indeed.
What is it about poetry that is so well suited to this messy subject?
Well, I suppose coming from a fairly conventional education background in Great Britain, in Wales specifically, war poetry is something that's central to English teaching. Almost every child who progresses to the later years of high school will be introduced to the poetry of Wilfred Owen and other First World War poets, but particularly Owen. Owen's got this central place really in our idea of who we are as a result of what we call the Great War, the 1914-18 war. And teachers quite rightly assume and discover that children of late teenage years respond to the perhaps simplified version of the horrors of the First World War, but to the implicit protests of poets like Wilfred Owen. Mm-hmm.
And is there also something about the form of poetry that makes it more effective? We tend to reach in times of trauma or in times when we don't really know where else to reach. What could you say about that, perhaps about something about the form of poetry?
I'm always surprised. I mean, I've in a crude sense made my living, paid my mortgages, put my kids through college because of poetry, because poetry is in my title. When I was given a personal chair at the university, I said, call me Professor Poetry, because that seemed to be, although I've done a lot of other things, that's essentially what it's about. And I think poetry is one of the most important things that human beings do. In terms of creativity, it's the best words in the best order. It's the most highly wrought and intense form of words, even more intense than the novel, although there are, of course, poetic passages in a novel. And because war is the most intense and serious thing that human beings also do in their public lives, it seems that poetry and war do go together. Mm-hmm. It changed for me. I mean, I was born in 1946, so I am a child. My parents met in the war. All my teachers had either been in the war and were messed up by it, or were messed up by the fact that they'd not been in the war. I grew up playing soldiers. But, we were shown those films of the liberation of the Belsen concentration camp. I grew up with war films about the RAF bombers, bombing the dam busters, bombing the Ruhr dams, and films about prisoners of war escaping and heroics and so on. So as a boy, particularly growing up in the 50s, it was war and cowboys and Indians that were the two commercialized myths that you somehow found an identity in. So later on, once I'd established the fact that I wanted to be a poet and had started publishing, because I'd reached the point where writing about my life and bereavement in my family and so on had got to the point where really I was clogging myself up with my own concerns, confessional poetry. Going to stories about artists at war and other people's experiences in war was a way of finding another voice for myself, somebody else's voice really, voicing other people's situations. And so creatively it was the right way for me to go anyway. And so more and more I was finding dramatic stories and dramatic moments in other people's lives, particularly in war, something that was my subject matter.
You have one of your collections is called War Voices, and it goes around the world through a lot of different times and wars. Would you mind reading us something from this collection?
I can do that. This collection came out in 1995, so that's about 15 years after this change of emphasis took place, where I really stopped writing about myself and what was happening to me. I'd reached a kind of early middle age, and I wasn't, things were going all right, so there was no great drama in my life. And this book is a selection from other books and some new poems, pulling together all those poems about war. It's got on the covers of my books are rather instructive. It's got the War Memorial at Cookham in Berkshire, which is where part of my family comes from, by the great British artist and veteran of the First World War, Stanley Spencer. And I was very keen that it took a bit of trouble to get that on the cover, but I wanted that sense of people, of a community gathering around the unveiling of this war memorial as the Union flag is dropped off it in this 1920s commemoration. I just felt that was an important image for it as well. Two of my previous books had art drawn from war on them. So I could read the first one.
Yeah, that's great.
It's not grouped chronologically, but the first part is called Through Fields of White Crosses, and then the Watchers, people further back from war, and the third part is The Rattle of Bullets in the Trees, very much about victims of war, and the final part, this drawing of lines from memory, again more reflective, visiting places of war, visiting battlefields and so on, and those are all quotations from various poems. This is a poem called From the City That Shone, and like a lot of these poems, this is a narrative taken from my reading of other people's. There was an academic called De Pinto, an Oxbridge academic in Britain, who actually had been in the war, and he told a story like this, and I just felt it was worth repeating. And I should say that because I'm using other people's voices, when I do poetry readings, I mean, I've got an educated Welsh accent, in case people are wondering what they're hearing. But I can do other, like T.S. Eliot, he do the police in other voices. You've got to be a kind of ventriloquist. So I become more English and rather posh. I'm a posh young English officer in the First World War here. From the City That Shone. The thing we dreamt of most was a bath. So we crossed the wire and made for Gonilou, where, it was said, a tin bath lay abandoned near the well of the convent school. We kept to ruined shadows down the street, towels and soap in our haversacks. John had a canvas bucket and filled it from the well. The bath held firm, the water cold and sweet. I lauded it there in the weedy garden, amidst the ransacked books strewn all about, broken glass wicked in the sun, then towelled dry while John tipped the water across the grass. I drew fresh water for him and passed the soap. I always sing, he said, too risky. But he splashed and hummed, and who shall kiss her ruby lips when I am far away? I sat on the path, my hair drying, my head thrown back to the clearing sky, where a taube stuttered through clouds from the west. In those moments before the guns started up, it seemed that summer was held in place. John rose from the water. Like a god, he said, his arms outstretched, then lobbed the soap grenade-like at my head. It squirted past me, a cricketer diving in the slips. We dressed. Each stuck a dog rose in his tunic and turned back to our trenches. Pressed into the shadows, I thought, what does all this mean? Two young soldiers, for a moment, Sunday school clean in all this mess. The Taube crossed overhead, coughing smoke, and made desperate way to his own lines.
That's beautiful.
That image of the German, the Taube, German, those crude aircraft, just as doomed as the men on the ground, of course. The airmen in the First World War were suffered terrible casualties. So even the sky is marked with smoke, and a wounded airplane that's probably going to crash and kill its pilot. That's obviously a working of somebody's remembrance of something that actually happened. Back from most of the time, you weren't fighting, you see, in the First World War. It wasn't the intense 3 days of Gettysburg. There was a lot of boredom, and the occasional shell coming over, and the occasional sniper's bullet breaking through that. But to go back to a chateau, or in this case a ruined convent where there was some clean water, and have a bath. And I said bath then. In the poem I say bath, because he would have said bath. And there's something, I suppose, as in Wilfred Rowan, there's something a little bit sexualized about that, about these two young men nakedly, having a bath. Something of camaraderie, of common experience, and just a slight undertone of homoeroticism, which is inevitable when you throw men together anyway, None of this has anything to do with my personal life, my personal experience, and it's so liberating. I would say to young poets, to young poets particularly, why should novelists get all the fun, having characters and dramatic situations and so on? Our poems can do that. It's healthy for us to change gender, change period, to become somebody else.
Absolutely, and I think it can, when you do that, you can also understand things that are right under your nose better once you've sort of, the more often you kind of take these journeys, then you can see yourself with a different perspective too, can't you?
Yeah.
Some of the new poems that you're working on too, you've got it. Do you want to tell us about your upcoming collected? Is that also going to be through Seren?
Yes, this time next year, just before I'm 70, and it sounds like it is an age, I suppose. I started writing and getting published in little magazines when I was an undergraduate. So the selected poems, selected and new poems, which will have the title From the Fortunate Isles. It'll be about 220 pages, and it's 1996 to 2016, so goodness, it's 50 years, and it doesn't feel like 50 years. But some themes continue. I've always written about family. I've always written about where I am, which is essentially Wales. I'm a frustrated historian. I switched from history as an undergraduate to English literature. The French Revolution completely confused me, so I had to switch. But a lot of the poems are to do with the 20th century. I mean, we're in the 21st century, but I think I'm a 20th century poet, post-war 20th century poet. So, yes, the poems still concern war, starting in War Voices from a poem about the American Civil War, and this is why it's important. It's just great for me to be in Gettysburg and have this wonderful battlefield tour with Peter, your husband, yesterday, because I got a poem about Matthew Brady, who took photographs of the dead, as we now know, quite staged photographs of the dead, rearranged because of the constrictions of photography. So it goes from there right up to Vietnam and the Middle East conflicts, and who knows, future conflicts. But we were on holiday in Italy last year, and this is where, again, what I would say to young poets: keep your ears open, listen to people. Give you poems. I think somebody may have given me one on this trip, but certainly doing the Italian lakes last summer, in the last day that we were there, we were on a long table with other people on the tour, and a very old man was talking, and I recognised his accent as being that of Berkshire, the royal county in England, which is where the Curtis family come from. And so I pricked up my ears and then engaged him in conversation, and he'd been just too young to make it into the Second World War. but he'd been working on a farm there. And of course, like in a lot of situations, a lot of societies, if you're a farmer, you didn't go to war, because, or if you worked in essential industry, as some of my people did in railways or manufacturing, you stayed at home. And this man talked about an incident, and as he was, at the moment he started talking, I thought, he's giving me a poem. He'll never know that. I didn't get his name, or I didn't follow up on it, but I almost immediately left that table and scribbled a few things down with a pencil, like poets are supposed to do. And I just knew that was going to be a poem. I could read that one for you.
That would be lovely.
Poets, I think writers become better writers if they continue reading. In my reading of the 20th century, there's an Anglo-Welsh poet called Edward Thomas, who wrote one of the great First World War poems, At the Team's Head Brass, and he talks about coming back from the front line, back to England, and seeing normal life, farm work still going on, and the glint of that farm equipment and the horses, and being a sort of, it's a visionary moment for him. And I thought, this man is giving me one of those, So this is a poem that is going to be published shortly, and then will be certainly in the selected poems. And it's 1945, right at the end of the war. And of course, that part of England is a kind of enormous aircraft carrier for USAF and British bombers and fighters. So a lot of action in the skies there. Following the horses. At 15, too young to plough, he was put to harrow with two of his father's shire horses, old enough and wise enough to know their own way. Sometimes in the length of that summer, he'd even hitch a ride on the roller. Birdsong, dreaming, not a care. That year, his clenched fists on handle and reins chafed and blistered and calloused into the roughness of a man's. Jasper and Ned made steady progress through the long afternoon to tea time. Then, over his shoulder, an approaching thunder, rumbling low and then louder, with the roar of a Wellington dragging its shadow over the fields that spooked both horses and boy. So he'd run forward to their huge, startled heads and talked them down. The bomber skimmed over Painter's Coppice, limping towards Hampstead and Orries. From its port engine, a pall of smoke across the trees and into the evening sky. That night, in the White Hart, his father heard them say the landing had been a close thing. The pilot, tough and skilled at 23. But tail-end Charlie, barely older than the ploughboy, had caught it. His shrapnelled guts held in by the navigator's arms until the ambulance came. 70 years on, he wonders what the ending might have been. Air crews didn't speak of what they'd seen, except through nods and looks and silences. That day, the smell of turned earth, clear blue skies etched with dark smoke, the reek of burning oil silencing the birds, and the horses' wide eyes.
Thank you. Powerful.
Yeah. That's a gift. I mean, all right, it's a gift for me to write, but he gave me that. But you write with your ears as well as your eyes. A poem must look like a poem. I feel very strongly about that. But there's got to be, there was rhyme in there and some internal rhyme. There's got to be a music about it. Yeah. But I can still hear his Berkshire burr talking about this, in one of those kind of ooh-ah sort of voices. And so having his voice in my inner ear while writing it helps to choose the words,
When you said people give you poems, I was just thinking of this sort of constant attention that preachers also have if they're and I was just thinking you could almost say, people give you sermons because, of course, in the course of the day, it's these things that you hear and stumble upon that can really be the key to even, how you approach the text that you're working on. Do you have any sort of writerly advice that you would perhaps like to say to poets and preachers in you've been writing for a very long time, and you've been teaching, of course, and workshopping for a very long time. Is there some? I know that's a very kind of broad question, but I think you know what I'm getting at.
I know what you're getting at, and you and I know that during my stay here, this has come up in conversation. Yesterday I was talking about the great Irish poet Seamus Heaney, about whom I edited a book of essays, and Heaney was at Harvard, but as I pointed out, he wasn't the professor of poetry at Harvard. He was the Boylston Professor of Rhetoric.
Right.
Now, rhetoric in a classical sense covers both the literary and the liturgical. The sermon and the poem are rhetorical. I'm here, the excuse for being over here is this little book called My Life with Dylan Thomas, some of which is true. Dylan Thomas was a great poet. He wasn't a practicing Christian, but his uncle had been a powerful preacher, a dramatic, rhetorical preacher in the Welsh language from the pulpit, and I think part of that tradition is carried through. If you listen to Dylan Thomas, those many recordings, a lot of them done in America, of Dylan Thomas performing, you do get a sense of what the Welsh call hwyl. Now, hwyl is almost untranslatable. It's chutzpah, it's rhetoric, it's a preacher's, I think it's something. If you could imagine Welsh nonconformist preachers being Southern black preachers, right? There's something of that gospel fervour about it. And it's not always good. Sometimes it's quite accusatory. Mm-hmm. But I think some of that seeps through into the best public performances of poetry. We shouldn't ham it up. But if we don't feel it, and if it doesn't matter for us, then we shouldn't read it, And I think that idea of rhetoric underpins many political and religious and poetry performances. I think we've all got that in common. Very well, very true. I'll read a poem called Workshop, which I wrote a few years back when I was still making a living, as it were, as a university professor and running workshops, and it will be in next year's selected poems. I feel very strongly that poetry actually is more important than prose. Prose is... We never see a great quarterback or a rugby player playing well and saying, it's sheer prose. Okay? Serena Williams' tennis game is not sheer prose. I mean, at her best, it's sheer poetry. Yes. So, there you've got it. There you go. It's the superlative. Poetry is superior. And so this is a workshop. This poem called Workshop is about poetry, really. Poetry is that which comes at the heart by way of the intellect. And this is the place where, who knows, one of us might struggle or stumble into or across a poem and carry the music of it through our lives like a poppy picked out of a wide field of corn. The green island squeezed into being between sea and sky. That electric metal flash from the spine of a mackerel. Like a rhyme ringing out of the commonwealth of prose. Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much. You've been listening to The Seminary Explores. I'm Katy Giebenhain with Seminary Ridge Review. My guest has been Tony Curtis. Learn more about Tony at his website, TonyCurtisPoet.com, or visit the Sarin Publishers at www.sarin.com.
serenbooks.com. Thank you. You have been listening to The Seminary Explores from historic Seminary Ridge in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, a production of Gettysburg Seminary. We invite you to visit our website at www.ltsg.edu. Opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of Gettysburg Seminary or the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America.